Welcome back to this episode of Nate Helps Rob Fulfill His Movie Goals.
Indeed.
Yes. This is Rob and Nate Record a Podcast, and tonight we watched a classic, perhaps you should say, film literacy film.
Mm-hmm.
And this checks off a movie off of my list for this year.
Oh,
so,
good.
Yeah.
Good for you. I didn't even realize that.
Well, the general category that I had at the beginning of the year for my movie goals, this totally fits into that. So thank you for helping me fulfill my movie goals.
You are quite welcome. And I am excited that I was able to help you fulfill this goal. And I'm excited about this whole month because this is our first episode of Billy Wilder month.
Yeah.
And Billy Wilder is one of my absolute favorite writer-directors. I am very excited to be curating this month. In fact, I could easily curate 3 Billy Wilder months.
And I don't doubt that. In fact, Nate has been talking about curating Billy Wilder months for multiple years.
Mm-hmm.
We put this on the calendar, and Nate has talked about this month since last November.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's already been decided we'll have a Billy Wilder month.
Possibly yearly for a couple of years.
Yeah, and we haven't even...
Even...
That was decided before we started Billy Wilder month, so
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
So my plan for what to do for this month is we're going to watch 4 films. One from the 40s, one from the 50s, one from the 60s, one from the 70s. 2 of them are going to be dramas, and 2 of them are going to be comedies. And the reason I want to do this is as a kind of representative sample, an overview, a survey course. Billy Wilder had a long career. His first film credit was in 1929. His last was in 1981. He worked over a pretty good selection, pretty good spread of genres, mysteries, film noir, biopics, but his favorite by far was comedy. He always considered himself chiefly a writer more than a director and chiefly a comedy writer.
Yeah.
But tonight's film, even though it has comic elements, is one of the dramas. It's going to be our representative of the 1940s, even though it is a 1950s release. It came out on August the 10th, 1950, so 70 years minus 1 week from the point that we are recording this.
6 days to be exact.
6 days. And 1950, of course, I'm justifying myself here, was technically the last year of the 1940s. This film was shot in 1949 and at least partly set in 1949. But going into this, you know that of my love of Wilder, but you've had kind of a limited experience. There's 2 of his films that I know you've seen. One is, in some ways, his best-known film, which is Some Like It Hot, because of the Marilyn Monroe connection. He made 2 films with Marilyn, and after making the second one, said, I'm too rich to ever have to go through that again.
That's hilarious.
She was famously difficult. So you've seen that, and then a few years ago for Christmas, I showed you my favorite Billy Wilder film, which is The Apartment.
Which I loved.
Which won the Oscar for Best Film, 1960.
Yeah.
Which is an excellent film.
Yeah.
2 things that film shares with this film is New Year's is part of the storyline, and characters named Sheldrake.
Oh, yeah?
Which is a name that's vaguely dirty, that Billy Wilder thought was funny, so he kept using it. But before we start talking about the film in much depth, I want to talk about Billy Wilder in a little bit, kind of about his career going up to this film. But going into this, what were your expectations? What did you know about Billy Wilder?
Well, I didn't know a lot about Billy Wilder. I actually didn't realize he was the director of Some Like It Hot. I'd forgotten he was the director of The Apartment. When you reminded me of that, my expectations went up a little bit. You know, I was like, okay, you know, if he directed those 2 and they're that solid, you know, this should at least be something decent. I was a little bit skeptical with how excited you've been about this month. I was kind of like, oh man, like what if this is something, there's something in here I don't like. There's, you know, like almost a sense of dread of like, oh man, what if it doesn't live up to Nate's expectations? I think it hit the mark.
So far, so good.
Yeah.
Well, Billy Wilder is an interesting man. He was born in 1906. He died in 2002. So this is a man who has both seen the Crown Prince of the Austro-Hungarian Empire alive and watched 9/11 on television.
Yeah.
And that's just crazy to think that's an incredible lifespan.
Oh, yeah.
When he died, I remember being surprised that he was still alive, because I had just assumed, this was before Wikipedia, that he had died a long time ago.
Yeah.
But obviously he had not. But he was born in what is now Poland, and what was then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, to a middle-class Jewish family. His father would die before World War II, but he would lose his mother and his sister in the concentration camps. He had left Europe by then, and I'll probably circle back a little bit to that. So after childhood, Wilder worked a number of jobs, including a reporter, dance instructor, and according to some accounts, a male prostitute.
Wow.
He ended up in the film industry in Berlin starting in about 1929. One of his earliest films was a film called Menschen on Sonntag, or People on Sunday,
Okay.
which is a film about a bunch of Berliners enjoying their Sunday off that was filmed about 2 or 3 years before the rise of the Nazi Party. And I have seen this film. When you watch it now, it's unintentionally creepy.
Yeah.
Because a lot of it was filmed on location, not really professional actors in a lot of the parts, and you just know a lot of these people were Nazis.
Yeah.
And it's just weird seeing them having a fun Sunday. But he worked as a screenwriter. He was, again, principally thought of himself as a writer in Germany up through about 33, 34. Had a fair number of credits. And then he left as the anti-Semitism started to get more serious, and he went over to France, and he made one film there. I'm going to butcher the title in French. Mauvais Garn, which translates to The Bad Seed. And this film is essentially Gone in 60 Seconds. It's a car thievery film that featured a then teenage Danielle Darot, who went on to be a huge star in France and who passed away in 2017 at the age of 100.
Huh.
He made enough money off of this film to finance his immigration to America, but he couldn't go in directly, and I forget the exact reason why. He went in through Mexico and essentially kind of sneaked across the border, but was let in. Because at this point in the mid-30s, I don't think the concentration camps had really started yet, but there was some understanding about what was going, by at least some people, about the plight of the Jews in Europe. And Wilder lucked out to find a fairly sympathetic border guard who let him in with minimal questions. And even though Billy Wilder, as I've said multiple times, was mostly thought of himself as a writer, in fact, his tombstone says, I was a writer, but nobody's perfect. So he gets to the border, and the border guard asks him, well, what do you do? It's like, I write movies. Border guard pauses for a moment and says, well, make sure you write some good ones. And let him in. And Wilder would comment that he tried to make good on that promise. This is a story that he told in his authorized biography. Again, for a writer, it's interesting that he never actually wrote an autobiography, but he did interviews for an authorized biography, which I've read, which I'm sure a lot of the information I'll share over the coming episodes will come from. But he made it to the United States, made it to California, got a job at Paramount Studios, which is basically where he stayed for the studio portion of his career before he went semi-independent. A lot of his 60s films were done with something called the Mersch Company. They did The Apartment and other films. But he was not obviously a native English speaker, and so the studio thought it would be wise to pair him with someone who was. And so they paired him with a man named Charlie Brackett, who had a completely different background for Billy Wilder. He was from an established New England family, if memory serves. He was very well educated. Wilder was mostly self-educated. He was very literate, and reportedly they didn't really like each other that much, but they really worked well together. And they had a tremendous period of successful output in the 40s, going into probably the early 50s, writing films. Billy Wilder was not always super pleased with the way the films that he wrote worked out. Whenever it was directed by a fellow expat named Ernst Lubitsch, he loved Lubitsch his entire life. He had a sign in his office into the 80s, I think, that said, "What would Lubitsch do?" He was his writing god, his idol for comic filmmaking. And so when Lubitsch would make one of his films, one of his scripts like Ninotchka or Ball of Fire, he was pleased, but not so pleased with the way some of the other directors adapted his work. And so he decided, to get my words right on screen, I need to become a director. And what he used as a bargaining chip to start directing at Paramount was the success of another writer-turned-director at Paramount named Preston Sturges. And Preston Sturges deserves a month at some point. He started out as a writer, became a director. He had an extraordinary extraordinarily intense, brief period of creative output during the World War II years, where he would do 3 or 4 films a year, and about 80% of them were excellent. He had the occasional misfire, but he did The Lady Eve, Miracle at Morgan's Creek, The Palm Beach Story, The Great McGinty, Hail the Conquering Hero. He was just pushing them out. And then he kind of spent his energy. And after the war, only made a couple more films, and they generally weren't as good. But because Sturgis had done so well, Paramount agreed to let him direct a film on a trial basis, which was a film called The Major and the Minor, which I did not realize until researching this was not written by Billy Wilder. It was a script from somebody else that they just let him direct. And it's a good film. It's not one of his strongest films, but it's funny. And it did well. And so after that, he was allowed to direct his own scripts. And he had a lot of success with that, directing the film Five Graves to Cairo in 1943, a World War II adventure film. The classic Double Indemnity in 48, the Academy Award-winning The Lost Weekend in 45. He made a film called The Emperor Waltz in 1948, which is set in the Austro-Hungarian Empire of his youth and is probably his most sentimental film. It's really, and it's kind of a musical. It's really not like anything else he did. A Foreign Affair in 1948, and then in 1950, the film that we watched this evening, Sunset Boulevard, one of his absolute classics, my second favorite Billy Wilder film after The Apartment. You came into this more or less blind, right? You knew the title, but you had no idea what this film was even about.
I knew that I should know a few things about this film, and now that we've finished the film, like, now there's certain things that stand out. You know, of course, this is where one of the all-time classic movie lines that's misquoted comes from. But yeah, yep.
I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. DeMille.
It's Mr.
DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Yep.
But it doesn't sound as good.
Yeah.
So you came in kind of blind. What did you think?
I thought it was good. It's a solid film. The character development across the film is very well done. Gloria Swanson as Norma Desmond is great. She plays that character arc very well. This film, the way it opens and the way the first, probably 30 minutes develops, you're kind of wondering, where is this going? And then it really starts setting up the plot device, and it has some great twists and turns. It has some good characters in it. Yeah, it's great.
I think I may have seen a couple moments of big grin on your face.
Oh, there was definitely some big smiles. Yeah, I don't know that I don't really have the big grin movie the way Nate does. But yeah, there were certainly moments that it totally paid off, and so big smiles on my face and things like that. But yeah. And actually, kind of a funny thing from this movie, at one point when they're in the reader's room in Betty Schaefer's office, he makes a comment of they'll share the same bed in shifts. It makes a smaller set, so it's cheaper to produce. Do you notice how small the sets are on this film in general? Most of it's either at the house or it's at the studio, that one little street in the studio. So they kind of, he works his own things into the movies.
Yeah, it's very much a self-referential film. It's very much a film about Hollywood in that period, which was a transitional period in Hollywood, as seemingly all periods are. One of the great things about it is about old Hollywood versus new Hollywood. Yeah. But that old Hollywood has now been replaced by several additional new Hollywoods over the course of time. And it's a film that provoked a strong reaction by some. Louis B. Mayer, the head of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, despised this film. They thought it was basically a finger to Hollywood from Wilder, and that it should not have been made. But he was treating it the way Billy Wilder treated his subject matter, which was with some affection, but also with a wry cynicism. Yeah. And so he could recognize the flaws and the short-sightedness and how people are forgotten in Hollywood. Yeah. And this is one of the great Hollywood films of all time. It really captures that era. We should probably talk a little bit about the plot, at least in thumbnail sketch. So this is the story of a man named Joe Gillis, played by William Holden. He is kind of a struggling writer. He's had a few, as he says, a few B films to his credit, and he's just having a slow streak. He's just not making money. He's owing money on his apartment. He owes money on his car. He's desperate to keep his car, which is a pretty cool convertible. Yeah. And so he's hiding it, but he's got the repo guys that are trying to get it. And again, to very briefly sketch out a skeleton of the story. He is caught by the repo men while driving his car looking for work and for ways to raise money to keep it. And so he gets in a kind of a chase, and a tire blows, and so he just pulls into the nearest driveway on Sunset Boulevard. And it turns out to belong to a former Silent star named Norma Desmond, played by Gloria Swanson. And through a course of events, he kind of falls in with her. She's delusional. She wants to make, not a comeback, I hate that word, it's a return, and is scripting a Silent-style adaptation of the Salome story from the Bible, which is a very Silent-era type of storyline.
Well, she said she spent like 6 years writing it.
6 years writing this.
And so he's supposed to just basically edit
Script
it.
doctorate, yeah. And over a course of time, he becomes aware that
Well, but
Norma,
his first introduction to Norma is that
the monkey
they think
funeral.
he's basically the
Undertaker,
yeah
the coffin
showing
man,
up with a coffin, yeah.
Because Norma has a pet monkey who has died, and so she had called for somebody to provide a child's coffin in which to lay the monkey to rest.
Very specific, though.
Yeah, she had very specific velvets and other things she talked about putting in it. It's a really bizarre scene.
Yeah.
And that scene where, he's wandering around the mansion, which at first he thinks is abandoned, and then he's called by Norma Desmond on the second floor, come over here, I need to talk to you. He goes over there, is let into the house by Max, her butler, and Max has this kind of offline after kind of pushing him up the stairs, and he's like, I don't think that what's going on is like, if you need any help with the coffin, let me know. And he has this wonderful look on his face, like, what the hell have I gotten myself into? What's going on? He goes upstairs, finds the dead monkey. At first, Norma Desmond, you're not who I wanted, get out of here. Wait, he makes some kind of crack about how he recognizes her, and then makes some kind of crack about how he's a writer. And she's like, you're a writer? And she commissions him to work on that horrible script and develops an obsession with him, and basically he becomes her kept man.
Yep.
And he feels very conflicted about this. And there is a woman played by Nancy Olson named Betty Schaefer, who is a reader at Paramount, who in an early scene tells Sheldrake, one of the producers there, that the story Bases Loaded, which is a baseball story that a desperate Joe Gillis is trying to get the studio to make, it's just not very good.
He's trying to sucker him into buying
Trying to sucker him, yeah. And so there's a little antipathy at first, but it turns out she has a connection to a buddy of his. They're dating and later engaged. And
played by Jack Webb.
Played by Jack Webb, and we'll get
Archie Green.
We'll get back to Jack Webb. And they end up working on a project together because she felt bad about dashing Gillis's hopes like that. So went into some of his old scripts on file, found a script that had a flashback scene dealing with a teacher that she thought was much better than the psychological murder mystery that it was put into, convinces him to work with her to develop a script about the teacher because they think they can sell it, and they start to have feelings for each other, and Norma Desmond becomes jealous. And the film ends in a way that you know it's going to end because it's the opening scene, but it's still a little bit of a surprise. There's still a little bit of a satisfaction when you see it coming together. It's like, oh, that's how that happens.
Yeah.
Now, the first scene in the film, of course, is narrated by a dead Joe Gillis about the morning in which his body is found in Norma Desmond's pool. And there's a really cool shot that they did with mirrors and other things that it looks like you're looking up at Joe Gillis's body from the bottom of the pool. It looks good for a shot from that period. That was not the original opening sequence of the film. The original opening sequence of the film would have followed Joe Gillis's body into the morgue with a little tag tied to his toe, and then the dead Joe Gillis would tell his story to the other corpses in the morgue.
Oh, really?
There is footage of this.
Yeah.
It was not. I don't think it ever made a final edit. But on the DVD, the special edition DVD, that's in there.
Sometime you'll have to bring that down. I'd be curious to watch that.
And
does it work?
It works, yeah. And I've actually got a funny story about that DVD, which you'll enjoy. And we forgot to talk about how I first came into acquaintance with this film. So I came into acquaintance with it basically by its name and its reputation as a great film. And in the months prior, especially prior to going on my mission, I tried to jam in as many well-regarded films as I could. And I watched this probably a few months before I went. I have a sharp memory of it because I'm pretty sure I told you the plot of this movie on the mission. You probably remember very little of it, but that was one of the things we would do for entertainment is I would present Elder Dredge Theater and I would tell the plots of movies and act them out.
Let's get this correct. It was Elder Dredge Masterpiece Theater.
Elder Dredge Masterpiece Theater, yes.
Yes.
And I was pretty good movie teller, especially at that time. My memory was very sharp for it. But I loved the movie, and I knew that when I got home, I definitely wanted to buy a copy. I bought my personal copy of this film when I came down here for your wedding.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so this was early 2003, so about a year after the Olympics. And while we were down, I went with my mom and my dad, and we went to the Gateway Center. And in the building that now houses the Barnes & Noble was a DVD store, and I bought my copy there.
Yeah.
Probably one of the first 5 DVDs I purchased.
Nice. That's fitting for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to talk about in this film, and I'm sure we'll jump around a little bit. The mansion. The interiors were filmed on a soundstage, but they used an actual mansion.
Really?
For the exteriors, which is long gone. A lot of the structures that were in this film have been torn down as development has happened over the ensuing decades. The apartment complex, though, that Joe Gillis has his little apartment in, at least at the time the DVD came out, special edition DVD came out in 2002-ish, still existed and was still an apartment complex.
I think it existed further than that. I think that apartment complex is also in the film Roman J. Israel Esquire.
It could be.
I think I recognized it, but it was hard because this was a black and white.
And then they also visit Schwab's drugstore, which was kind of a famous institution in Los Angeles at the time. It was where people in the industry would hang out. And there's a famous untrue story that Lana Turner was discovered by the director Mervyn LeRoy at the malt counter at Schwab's drugstore.
Yeah.
So it was the place to be seen. We should definitely talk about the cast.
Yeah.
I mean, how can you not? This is a wonderfully cast film. William Holden plays Joe Gillis. William Holden had been in Hollywood for better than a decade, but his career had never really taken off. He had been a working actor, but he was never a big star. His first film in Hollywood was an adaptation of a Broadway play called Golden Boy. And the play starred on Broadway John Garfield. But for whatever reason, I think there's probably a scheduling conflict. He was at a different studio than got the rights. He was not offered that part, even though it's the part that kind of made him. It's a story, it's kind of a melodramatic story about a man who's a boxer, but he's also a violinist, and which one is his real passion. And I didn't really care for it when I finally saw it. But they decided it would be a good intro for William Holden, who the studio hoped big things from. But within a few weeks of starting filming, the studio was having second thoughts and said, maybe we need to get Garfield and get rid of Holden. But Barbara Stanwyck, his co-star in the film, said, if you get rid of him, I'm gone. It's like, you got to give the kid a chance. And many years later, when Barbara Stanwyck got her American Film Institute Lifetime Achievement Award, one of the speakers was William Holden, who said, the only reason I have a career is because of Barbara Stanwyck.
Yeah.
Which is sweet.
Yeah.
Anyway, that film, not a huge success. He continued to work, but this was the movie that really launched his career. Yeah. He would make an additional 3 movies with Billy Wilder: Sabrina, with Audrey Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart; Stalag 17, for which he would win his Oscar; and then Fedora in the late 70s, which was Billy Wilder's second to last film, which has a lot of similarities to Sunset Boulevard in that it is also about a reclusive star. It's not nearly as good. So this would start, the 50s were an excellent decade for William Holden. He made Love is a Many-Splendored Thing. I think he made that. He made Bridge on the River Kwai. He was a real big name star in the 50s. Then his career would start to peter a bit in the 60s, and then he would have another rejuvenation of his career after the success of The Wild Bunch in 1968. And then he would make at least one more great film, which is Network, before dying kind of sadly in the early 80s. He was drunk, hit his head on a coffee table, and either could not reach the phone on it or decided he would rather not bother to call for help and died in his apartment.
Wow.
It's a really sad ending. Gloria Swanson plays Norma Desmond. What did you think of her?
She plays the role well. It's a very well written character, but it's such an odd character. I'd want to see Gloria Swanson in something else before I made up my mind about her.
Mm-hmm. I think it's her best performance. I've only seen her in 3 other films. This is the one that you remember. And she always felt she didn't like that because her and a number of characters in this film, especially Erich von Stroheim, who we'll get to, are playing versions of themselves.
Yeah.
And Swanson's version of herself in this is not very complimentary. She's crazy. Now, the real Swanson was not that. The real Swanson was pretty sharp. This character career basically ended when talkies came. Swanson's did not. She was not as big a talkie star as she was a silent star, but she continued to work periodically. But she didn't really need to work because, like Bob Hope and a few other actors, she realized buy LA real estate. She bought a lot of LA real estate when she was young, and that took care of her for the rest of her life because she was one of the big property owners in Los Angeles. It's a great performance. I mentioned I've only seen her in 3 other things, one of which she plays herself, which is in the movie Airport 1975, which also features Nancy Olson. And then I'd seen Beyond the Rocks, which is the silent film that she made with Rudolph Valentino, who is referenced in the film. That film from 1922 was for a long time thought to be lost until a 98.5% intact copy was found in the collection of an eccentric Danish film collector in like the late 90s and was restored. It's okay. It's a silent romance. And then last night I decided I should watch another Gloria Swanson film, so I watched a film called Indiscreet from 1931, an early talkie, and it sucked. It was bad. I did not like it. Yeah. The review I read of it online had mentioned that it was a comedy, and I'm like, where's the comedy?
The comedy was in it for that writer who got you to watch it expecting a comedy.
Yeah, pretty much. It was a love quadrangle, and it didn't catch me. Yeah. It's not very long, which was helpful. There is one moment where Gloria Swanson gives another character a death glare. That is such a great death glare that it should be a meme. Like, it's just like, she looks like she could literally kill the man sitting next to her. But she lived a long life, born 1899, died in 1983. They make a comment in the film that Norma Desmond was married 3 times. Gloria Swanson was married 6 times, her final marriage to her biographer in her later years.
So she is the character she plays
in some ways she is. I mean, the DeMille relationship, they talk about in this film that Norma Desmond had made a dozen films with Cecil B. DeMille. Gloria Swanson made 6. And when Cecil B. DeMille, who has a wonderful cameo in the film, says young fella as a nickname, that was his nickname for Gloria Swanson. You have Erich von Stroheim. Erich von Stroheim, a very Germanic fellow who was a great silent director who was eccentric and kind of did himself in as a director.
And feels like he should be a Bond villain.
He does. Had he lived longer, he would have been an excellent doctor, an excellent Blofeld. He looks like Blofeld.
Yeah.
They had made a 1950s James Bond movie. It would have been an obvious casting choice. He, after directing dried up, he was an actor, both in Europe and in the United States. He was in a great film, French film called The Grand Illusion in the late 30s. And he played General Rommel in Billy Wilder's Five Graves to Cairo in 1943, even though he does not look like General Rommel. But he's got the Germanic bearing. Rounding out the main 4 in the cast is Nancy Olson, who was 21 at the time this film was made. She is still with us at the age of 92. She is perhaps best known as Fred McMurray's love interest in the Nutty Professor films. She's worked off and on over the years. Then we have Jack Webb. I believe Jack Webb was probably already doing Dragnet on the radio at this point. He's, of course, most famous as Joe Friday. What I love about this role for him is it's completely nothing like Joe Friday.
Yeah.
Joe Friday is just the facts man. This guy is a jokester.
Yep.
He's a very likable man. He's an assistant director who is a friend of Joe Gillis's, who has also becomes engaged to Betty Schaefer, and kind of complicates things when Betty Schaefer, after spending time at night writing the screenplays with Joe, realizes I love Joe, and basically sets up Joe's untimely demise when Gloria Swanson finds out.
This also has Fred Clark as Sheldrake, and then a lot of people as themselves. You mentioned Cecil B. DeMille, Hedda Hopper, Buster Keaton. Yeah, there's several
Nelson, H.B. Warner, who you would remember as Mr. Gower. Mr. Gower.
Yeah.
From It's a Wonderful Life, but who in the 20s was a huge star, a leading man. He played Jesus Christ in Cecil B. DeMille's King of Kings in 1927.
Yeah.
DeMille's cameo was, they have a number of scenes at Paramount, and DeMille's cameo was filmed while he was making the film Samson and Delilah.
Yeah.
So that places this film, which kind of the centerpiece of it is a really awkward New Year's party. A couple New Year's parties. Gloria Swanson's, which is super awkward, and then the one at Jack Webb's house, which is much more playful and includes cameo appearances by the writers of the song Button and Bows, which had just won a Best Song Oscar, singing Buttons and Bows.
Yeah, that whole New Year's Eve part of the plot was pretty interesting and well executed.
But anyway, the DeMille cameo, he's shooting Samson and Delilah, which came out in 1949, which puts this film as spanning 1948 through 1949, but not in the musical version. You probably were not aware that there is an Andrew Lloyd Webber Sunset Boulevard musical from the early 90s that starred Glenn Close in the Gloria Swanson role. It is excellent. It is the only Broadway musical soundtrack that I have ever purchased.
Wow.
I would highly recommend it. In fact, I'm pretty sure I'm going to listen to it tonight.
Yeah.
But in that musical version, it's 49-50 because of some lyrics in the New Year's Eve party song. 1950 will be my start. I'll stop carrying spears, says the poor spear-carrying actors.
Yeah.
What did you think of the use of DeMille and some of the old actors and just the homages to old Hollywood?
Well, so the more that I'm sitting here, I mean, Nate intentionally didn't tell me what we were watching tonight until tonight, so I had no opportunity to do some research. But as we're sitting here and talking about it, and I'm doing, learning a little bit more about it, I can see why some people say, referred to this as Billy Wilder's FU to Hollywood. I can see some of that. I mean, he certainly wants to play on a lot of the Hollywood stereotypes of the time, and he wants those to fit into his movie, and he wants to kind of, I don't know if mock them is the right word, but he wants to reference them and make jokes about them.
And he wants to say that Hollywood's not a kind place.
Yeah.
And Hollywood, especially at this era, or this was starting to fray a bit by the late 40s, early 50s, but it had this magic town kind of thing, and it wanted to be this fantasy world, but it wasn't. He wasn't the first person to take digs at Hollywood like this, as you will see soon when you watch, as we discussed earlier, the original A Star is Born. A Star is Born has some harsh things to say about 1930s Hollywood, but this film is particularly pointed.
It seems like every century that there is films that want to have messages about Hollywood. Seems like there's one that comes every decade, if not more than one.
The Player in the 90s, Hollywood Boulevard in the 70s, Tropic Thunder in the early 2000s. I mean, this is something that is returned to pretty often. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a theme that comes up over and over again. It's interesting to see it closer to the beginning of what we consider modern day Hollywood, but yeah.
You got to talk about the writing. You got to talk about the dialogue. It's so great. There's so much good dialogue in it. One of the great things about the film is the narration that Joe Gillis gives throughout the film, which gives us some of the best dialogue in it. And I'm going to read a few selections from that from IMDb. Well, this is where you came in. Back at that pool again, the one I always wanted. It's dawn now, and they must have photographed me 1,000 times. Then they got a couple of pruning hooks from the garden and fished me out, ever so gently. Funny how gentle people can get with you once you're dead. Audiences don't know somebody sits down and writes a picture. They think the actors make it up as they go along. The poor dope, he always wanted a pool. Well, in the end, he got himself a pool. So they were turning after all, those cameras. Life, which can be so strangely merciful, had taken pity on Norma Desmond. The dream she had clung to so desperately had enfolded her. That, of course, refers to the whole plot line about the script. So she has this horrible script that Joe does his best to prune. They send it Paramount.
Well, but she also won't let him prune.
Yeah. He has no expectations that it's going to be picked up because it's absolutely horrible. But they keep getting calls from Paramount. And Norma Desmond assumes that it's about her script, is upset that it's some studio functionary named Gordon Cole who keeps calling and not DeMille. So she keeps holding out for DeMille to call, gets tired of waiting. They take their old, I wrote down the name of this awesome Germanic car someplace, and Azata Fraschini, a 1929 handcrafted automobile, which in the dialogue they state cost $28,000, which in 1929 would have been a little more than $422,000. So it's an extravagant, there was so much extravagance in the 1920s. So they go to the studio, and that's where the DeMille cameo comes on, where he's trying to tell her that they're not going to make the film, but can never quite bring himself to do it because she's so delusional and not hearing when he tries to subtly bring that up. But the reason why the studio kept calling was because they wanted to borrow her elaborate 1920s automobile for a Bing Crosby film.
Yeah.
Period piece. The character, Gordon Cole, who's responsible for this, has one scene. He has probably 2 or 3 lines of dialogue. But he is, in a way, the central character of the film. He's a pivot point. That if he had not called about this car, would Joe Gillis have died? He set in motion these events. He facilitated them.
Yeah.
And David Lynch, another one of my favorite directors, is a big Billy Wilder fan. And on the television series Twin Peaks, he plays a recurring character, an assistant FBI director named Gordon Cole, as a tribute to this film.
Nice. That's awesome. A little piece of trivia I found while we were sitting here. As a practical joke, this comes from IMDb. During the scene where William Holden and Nancy Olson kiss for the first time, Billy Wilder let that kiss go on for minutes without yelling cut. Apparently, he'd already gotten the shot that he wanted and needed on the first take, and so he just was messing with them. But eventually, do you know who actually called cut?
Who?
William Holden's wife, who was on set that day.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Nancy Olsen's great in this. She's very girl next door.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
There is so much trivia on this on the IMDb page.
Oh, yeah.
I was just looking at it, and I don't think I've ever seen a trivia page on IMDb that had more entries.
Yeah. So
it could be worth, if you're interested, and especially if you know the film, to kind of look up some of these stories associated with it. It's just a beautifully rich film. It's a film that I absolutely love, and that I'm excited that I got to show you.
There's a lot of layers in this film, and it's great. But yeah.
It's such unusual. I mean, what would you even say this is? I mean, it's got comic elements. It's a drama.
I would consider it a drama.
It's a little bit film noirish at points.
I would consider this pretty solidly a drama. If anything,
it's satirical.
I would, if anything, I'd call it a comedic drama.
No.
This film, or a dramatic comedy. Well, no, I wouldn't call it a dramatic comedy. I'd call it a comedic drama.
Yeah. This film did quite well. Obviously, it revitalized the career, especially of William Holden.
Well, 9 Oscar nominations.
9 Oscar nominations. I feel that this should have won the Oscar. It did not. The film that won the Oscar that year was...
You mean for Best Picture?
For Best Picture.
Okay.
The film that won that year is a film called All About Eve with Bette Davis, which is a satirical film about Broadway as opposed to Hollywood. And it was felt that maybe the people in Hollywood were more comfortable voting for skewering the East Coast than for skewering things back home.
Well, this did win 3 Oscars. Do you remember which 3?
I do not.
It won Best Writing for Story and Screenplay, Best art direction, set decoration, black and white, and best music, scoring of a dramatic or comedy picture.
It's a good score.
Yeah.
You don't always notice it a lot, but there's a few scenes in which you do. The most memorable part of the score is that last scene, which we have to talk about the last scene.
Well, real quick, I was going to mention the other Oscar nominations. It also received a nomination for Best Actor in a supporting in a leading role, Best Actress in a leading role, Best Actor in a supporting role, Best Actress in a supporting role, Best Director, Best Cinematography, black and white, Best Film Editing, and Best Picture.
Yeah.
So I mean that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean all four major parts.
Yeah.
Got those nominations. That doesn't happen too often.
Nope. So, but yeah, the final scene.
The final scene. So, as is fated, Norma kills Joe in a fit of jealousy. She breaks, and you can see the moment in the film in which she goes crazy. She's always a little bit crazy, but there's a moment in which Joe's leaving her, and she just can't take it.
Well, I wondered throughout the film, because obviously you know what's coming from the opening of the film. I wondered who would be the one that would end up shooting him. But I knew it the moment you see the gun on the bed.
Yeah, you may have thought for a while it was Max. I mean,
Yeah,
he's
towards the beginning of the
the
film.
only other suspect, and Max certainly has an interesting backstory that's not revealed until very late. He's the very loyal butler, and it turns out that he was the director who discovered Norman Desmond and was her first husband.
Yep.
Could have continued his career, but was so distraught by the breakup of the marriage, just had to be around her, that he consented to be the butler through 2 additional marriages and who knows how many affairs and romantic relationships.
Entanglement.
There's so much about the excesses of the 20s in this film. The crazy, kind of the crazy houses that the crazy movie stars made in the crazy 20s.
Yep.
And they were making $18,000 a week without taxes, and they were buying $500,000 by modern equivalents automobiles, and she had a house with 8 bedrooms and sunken tubs.
8 master bedrooms.
8 master bedrooms, sunken tubs in each bedroom, a bowling alley in the cellar. She has a house on the beach in Glendale. I forget the town that she mentions that we never see, but that she has and she maintains. And like the real Gloria Swanson, Norma Desmond bought a lot of land and bought oil wells and stuff when she was at the top of her career, and so she is in no need of money.
Yeah.
Even though she lives in a Miss Havisham type situation in this decaying mansion that I am so sad was torn down.
Yeah.
I wish that still existed.
Well, you get the impression that even then it wasn't in the best of shape.
And I think it may have been the same mansion that was used in Rebel Without a Cause. There's a scene where they go into an abandoned mansion in the Hollywood area, and that movie was filmed only 5 years later, so the mansion was probably still around at that point. I'd have to double check that, but
The closing scene.
The closing scene, she's crazy, and the cops are there, and the press is there, and Hedda Hooper, the gossip columnist, who was also a star in a sporting player in the silent era, and probably would have known that character from their Hollywood acting days, are there, and she's delusional, and they have to figure out how to get her out of the house. And when she hears that cameras are there, she's like, "Oh, the cameras for my scene."
Yeah.
And Max gets to direct her again, going down the stairwell.
But she doesn't realize it's Max.
Thinking it's DeMille, thinking they're shooting her Salome picture. And then she gives a gushing "I'm so happy" speech as she's being led out for probably a murder charge.
She does her scene coming down the staircase in the Grand Palace, and then at the bottom she says, "Oh no, we have to cut. I'm
so
too happy
too
for
happy."
this." And so she gives her happy speech, and then we get the famous line, "Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up."
And she does some creepy gesticulations with her hands, and we fade to black.
Yep.
It's a wonderful film. I love it. I would give it 4 stars out of 4 and 10 out of 10.
Why
what
am I
are
not
you
surprised by
feelings?
that? I would give this 4 stars on the 4-star scale. On the 10-star scale, I'd give it a solid 9 stars.
It's a definite film literacy film. I don't know how many times I've seen it. Probably a dozen.
Yeah.
Maybe more.
It's definitely one I'll go back to at some point. But yeah, I'm glad we watched that this week. So, solid start to Billy Wilder month.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't let me down. Keep this going like we did with Werner Herzog month.
Werner Herzog month.
Yeah.
All right. I'll do my best.
Okay. Well, I'm Rob.
And I'm Nate.
And this is Rob and Nate Record a Podcast. Oh, yeah. Well, you talking about Billy Wilder? Come on.
Mm.
Yeah. You got to unload all your knowledge somewhere, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, this week's little bonus content. We're going to actually taste a soda that should be okay.
Okay.
Or good.
We're getting some pushback from the root beer store.
Yeah, the owner of the root beer store, I told him about the bits we've recorded, and he's getting upset with me and says we need to try some good sodas. So we're going to try some good sodas. So tonight's soda choice is from the Orca Beverage Bottling Company. That's a good bottle lid.
That is a good lid.
And it is Red Arrow Root Beer.
It's a nice can. It's a neat font on the Red Arrow.
Yeah. And I'm going to use my bottle opener tonight. I'm curious how the sound will differ from Nate's traditional bottle opener. This is a push-down bottle opener, so...
Ding.
Yep. I've had this soda before, so I'm curious to see what Nate thinks of this root beer.
It sounds good.
Yeah. Take a whiff of that. That's got a good root beer flavor smell. Yeah. It has a nice flavor. It's bold, but not overbearing.
I actually tried this for the first time like a week ago.
Oh, come on.
So I deflate it a little bit, but I do like this root beer.
Yeah.
This is one of the better ones.
I also tried this about a week ago. I was highly impressed by this. I almost texted you the label.
Mm.
I was impressed by this. This is one this is like I think my third one of this one.
Mm.
So yeah, it's definitely one that to add into the repertoire.
It's darker.
Yeah. Like I said, it's a little bit bolder than your average root beer, but not like overbearing in it.
It tastes kind of high end, for lack of a better word. Like it. Oh, how about that?
Yeah.
That'll sound fun. I have talked about the Pepsi, and I think I had you have some. The Pepsi 1893, which is basically high end Pepsi. And it kind of reminds me of that a little bit. It just tastes like it's better quality root beer.
This says it has extract of wintergreen and licorice. I think that might be the
Yeah.
difference. Yeah.
And I don't know if it was this or another one that I was having recently that I was trying to place it. It was the wintergreen. It must have been this.
The label on this bottle says Red Arrow Root Beer from Michigan, known for authentic root beer flavor. Folklore says the brand was a tribute to the Red Arrow Brigade. So, yeah.
Now we're going to have to Google the Red Arrow Brigade.
I'll leave that to you.
Mm.
Yeah. What do you think of that one?
I like it.
How many bottle caps would you give it?
How many bottle caps? We'll have to come up with some kind of elaborate,
a rating
cheesy
system for
rating
the root
system for the root beer.
Yeah. Yeah, so that is us tasting a quality soda.
Yeah.
Yeah. We will kind of take turns picking sodas for the other to taste from time to time. So, yeah. Anything else on that one?
No.
Yeah. All right. See you guys later.